Welcome to the Lubbock CoC's 2026 Data Standards Training. This training will cover the data elements that are required to be collected by HMIS participating housing and housing-related programs, as well as the logic and reasons for each element. This training will also cover common data quality issues encountered and potential solutions to those issues. Any HMIS user accessing the system to enroll clients in housing or housing-related programs is required to complete initial and annual data standards training. If you are working for a CoC, ESG, SSVF, PATH, or privately funded housing or housing-related project, like emergency shelter or street outreach, and you enter data into HMIS, this training is for you and is required to maintain access to the database. Be sure to watch the video completely and take notes based on the requirements for your specific program. You can pause the video at any point. You will have access to these slides when you complete the quiz. You can find the information referenced in this training using these links. The majority of the information comes from the HUD 2026 Data Standards Manual, which is a guide for users and system administrators on the current definitions of data elements required by HUD and partner agencies, like the VA. There is also the HUD Data Standards Interactive Tool, which provides nearly the same information as the manual, but may be more accessible for some users. The Data Dictionary gives programming logic for each data element. This may or may not be useful for our end users. Lastly, there are monthly HMIS administrator calls, which occasionally provide clarifying information on data elements. The slide decks for those are linked here and references throughout this training. First, we will cover what data standards are. We will then cover the data elements required by each project type, then go through each element in detail based on information provided by HUD for each element. Data standards are published by HUD every 2 to 4 years. These standards tell us what data elements are required by each funding source and project type. Some elements are universal data elements, UDEs, and are required by all project types, and some are project-specific. The CoC is required to provide annual training on data standards to all users enrolling clients in housing and related projects programs. The information that is collected helps the CoC plan and see the on-the-ground picture of homelessness. In order for this information to be reliable, it is necessary for all users to have a common understanding of each element they are responsible for collecting and inputting. We won't be going into detail for all the project-specific information, only the project data applicable to our area. Again, these standards tell us how to answer each data element. Some standards are fairly straightforward, like race, ethnicity, and others are more nuanced and require more engagement with a client when entering real client information, like prior living situation. All information entered into the system is self-reported by the client. No documentation is required for data entry. Some projects, like PSH, have documentation requirements for project entry. However, data entered into the system does not have to be verified by the caseworker unless clarification is needed. Also, the CoC can and may require additional elements be collected to get a better idea of the state of homelessness at any given time. However, there are currently no additional data elements required by the CoC outside the HUD standards. The goal of this data collection, whether required by HUD or the CoC, is to help create and monitor the homeless response system's ability to ensure that instances of homelessness are brief and non-recurring to the greatest extent possible. If you are unsure the funding source or project type you should pay attention to, pause the video and ask your program manager so you can be informed on the collection requirements for the programs your organization operates. This is a list of project types that require specific data elements outlined in the data standards. If your organization operates one or more of these programs/projects, this training is for you. We will be going over the individual data elements in later slides, but first, we're going to list each project type and the data elements required for each. Pause the video at any time when a project type your organization operates is mentioned so you can take note of the required elements and be sure to pay particular attention when those items are discussed in detail. We will start out with the universal data elements. These are required for all housing and related projects, those listed on the previous slide, regardless of funding source. Take note of these elements. Again, these will be discussed in more detail later. Universal data elements, UDEs, are required for all clients, in all programs, including children. The only exceptions are prior living situation, veteran status, and move-in date. Prior living situation is collected only for adults and the head of household. Veteran status is collected from all adults, and move-in date is for permanent housing heads of household only. It is important to note head of household, HOH, versus adult. HOH includes any unaccompanied minors, as they are considered the head of household when they present without an adult present. Information required only for adults isn't required for minors or unaccompanied minors. More details on how and when to enter this data will be covered later. Pause the video and take note of these elements for now. Also note who in the household each element is required for. If nothing is listed, assume it is required for all household members, including children. Generally, the information for children is gathered from their guardians unless they are unaccompanied. Next, we will start looking at project-specific data elements that need to be collected by projects in addition to these universal data elements. Here are the elements that need to be collected by supportive services-only projects, whether funded by CoC, ESG, or private funds. Pause here if your organization runs an SSO project, and note the elements required and what member of its household it's needed from. These are the elements required for street outreach projects funded by CoC, ESG, or private funds. Pause here if your organization runs a street outreach program and take note of these elements and whom they're required from. These are for night-by-night, NBN shelters, of which there are currently none in Lubbock or Lubbock County. Here are the elements required of emergency shelter entry-exit projects. Pause and take note if your organization runs an entry-exit emergency shelter project. These are the required elements for transitional housing projects. Pause and take notes as needed. This is for all permanent supportive housing projects, with or without disability required for entry. Pause here if your organization runs a PSH program. These are the required elements for rapid rehousing, RRH projects, funded by CoC, ESG, or private funds. Pause here if your organization runs an RRH program and take note. These are for all prevention projects funded by ESG or private funds. Pause as needed. SSVF is required to complete the elements outlined on this slide. The information is required for both RRH and prevention, with the exception of HP targeting criteria, which is required only for the SSVF prevention projects. Pause to take note if your organization runs an SSVF program, and take note of the household members the information is required from. These are the required elements for HUD-VASH programs. Pause as needed. These are required for both SSO and SO projects under PATH. Elements required regardless of project type funded under YHDP. There are currently no YHDP-funded projects in the area, so elements specific to these projects will not currently be covered. Requirements depend on project type, funded under Runaway and Homeless Youth, RHY, Basic Center, Transitional Housing, etc. These will be broken down if the area gets RHY funding in the future. This is the end of the Data Standards Training Introduction. Rewind or rewatch if you missed any of the information before continuing to the quiz. And remember that your organization may require other data collection in addition to the HUD standards. Be sure to check with your program manager to see if there are any additional data collection requirements for your program.